When it comes to Israel's occupation or apartheid or constant attacks on Gaza, it's not that common to find two former Israeli soldiers willing to talk about any of it. But Benzion Sanders and Ariel Bernstein are two exceptions. The two former Israeli soldiers have turned themselves into activists who speak out against Israel's horrific oppression in Gaza and the West Bank. They've also both worked for the anti-occupation veterans group Breaking the Silence, where Ariel is currently a researcher. The two men served in the 2014 war in Gaza. Israel leveled huge chunks of the Strip back then, but even that pales in comparison to what the Israeli military is doing in Gaza today. Nonetheless, for both Sanders and Bernstein, their 2014 deployment to Gaza was an awakening experience. They started to question their country's treatment of the Palestinians, which they still do to this day. And they join me now from Israel. Ariel, Benzi, thank you so much for coming on Mehdi Unfiltered today. Benzi, let's go back in time. Let's start with a bit of history. Let's go back a decade. It's 2014. You find yourself serving in Gaza. What was that like? What did you see? And how does that inform your view of what is happening in Gaza today with the Israeli military?
Yeah, well, Mehdi, as you said, it pales in comparison to what we're seeing today, but a lot of the horrific footage of the bombings and the post-apocalyptic scenes from Gaza today remind me of what I saw and what we experienced walking through Beit Hanun, where Ariel and I were deployed. That war also came on the heels of a horrific terrorist attack carried out by Hamas operatives, kidnapping and murdering 3 Israeli children. And really, at the time, I was much, much younger. I was 23 years old, and I thought that we really needed to defend Israel from this horrific threat. And they told us before we went into these residential areas that all the residents were warned. We went in with enormous amount of firepower, aerial bombardment, artillery fire, and basically going house to house with live fire, assuming that everyone in each house was innocent. There was actually even an instance where an entire family was found by another team in one of the houses, and they didn't actually open fire and kill or injure any of them, despite those being the instructions to really go into every house with live fire. They realized they were innocent. They gave them food and water, and they guarded them for a few days. But as soon as we encountered some resistance, a rocket fire was shot at one of the other houses that was taken over by our unit. We pulled back after one of the officers in our unit was killed, and many were injured. And then the Air Force just came over flew over that neighborhood and bombarded the entire neighborhood, killing 8 members of the family called the Wahdan family. I learned this later as I researched kind of what I experienced, what I saw. And this destruction and this fighting really set me on a journey, really asking myself, how did we get into this situation? How can we avoid this situation in the future? And what I discovered was that not only did we not defeat the enemy Hamas that we were sent to fight against and to neutralize, but we actually, my own government propped them up. One year in 2015, after Ariel and I were sent to fight Hamas, you have who's now one of the most senior members of the current Israeli coalition, Bezalel Smotrich, saying that Hamas is an asset.
Yes.
Because really, for the pro-settlement movement Israeli government, which has been in power for so long, for over 15 years, yeah, Hamas is an asset. They prop them up, and that's what infuriated me so much. And that's the context in which I see this current fighting.
So, Ariel, Benzi mentions Hamas. When you went into Gaza, as he did in 2014 with Israeli Special Forces, did you think you were going in to punish Hamas, finish Hamas, protect Israel? Was that the goal? And did you come home feeling victorious? Did you feel like job done?
That's a good question. So definitely coming in, I was already questioning my role in the occupation after participating in many missions in the West Bank that kind of disturbed me, basically dominating millions of Palestinians in the West Bank in different ways. So I was already questioning it, but I felt like this is the moment I was trained for, to enter Gaza. You know, there they want to kill us. They're fighters, they're terrorists. And I did enter with a feeling that this is what I was trained for, and I'm going to protect Israel. But we didn't have a mission to finish Hamas. The mission was to conquer the neighborhood of neighborhood in Bet Hanun in order to defend a technical unit that was supposed to destroy offensive tunnels underneath the neighborhood. So the mission wasn't to destroy Hamas, but it was to teach them a lesson they'll never forget, maybe. And leaving Bet Hanun, the neighborhood that I spent together with Benzi 2 weeks in was left completely destroyed. It looked like the most apocalyptic image I've seen. And as we were looking at the planes dropping bombs on the neighborhood, I actually felt a relief. I wasn't horrified by what I was seeing because I was just happy that I'm alive and my teammates are alive, my comrades. But immediately afterwards, when I come back home and I saw the celebrations and kind of how fast everybody moved on and just celebrated this fake, false sense of victory, I became very disturbed. By what I've seen, it started to haunt me. The fact that I felt relieved, and secondly, by the fact that we didn't end any of the problems. We didn't solve any problems. We were sent there to do a military operation, but the political the political sphere did nothing, and the politics did nothing to prevent the next round.
Ariel, do you believe you were part of a campaign of war crimes when you were sent into Gaza in 2014?
I'm not a professional or a expert on war crimes. I'm a researcher. I do activism, but I don't know if it's a war crime, but destroying a whole neighborhood and all the buildings that we've seen and been inside for no apparent clear reason seems to me, I don't know if it's a war crime or not according to international law, but it seems like a crime. It seems like something that I am ashamed that I took part in.
Benzi, Ariel says there he's ashamed of what he took part in. I'm watching TikTok videos coming out of Gaza right now from Israeli soldiers who were your age when you served in 2014. They are doing TikToks of wearing Palestinian women's lingerie that they're finding in their houses, ransacking their homes, mugging for the cameras and smiling as they blow up schools and universities and empty homes and who knows who's in the homes. What do you make of what's going on with Israeli soldiers on the ground? How do we describe what we're seeing in these TikTok videos?
Yeah, you know, I've seen the clips, and honestly, you know, if that was the only problem, it really wouldn't bother me as much as the fact that, you know, over probably 25 to maybe 30,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed by airstrikes. You know, if that number was, you know, a tiny fraction of that, or if there was some kind of long-term goal to defeat Hamas, you know, I would, you know, be able to kind of forgive these images of illicit activity or improper conduct. To me, the focus on the fact that we're fighting an entire war, we're destroying an entire community, millions of people who are suffering starvation, and you know, with no strategic goal to prevent this from happening again. Hamas is returning to the areas that have been defeated. You know, it wouldn't bother me so much.
But Benzi, isn't there an interconnection though between the bombing and the lack of a strategic goal and these videos? Because these videos show us that ordinary Israelis, not politicians, not Smotrich or Ben-Gvir, but ordinary young Israelis going into Gaza basically don't see Palestinians as human. There's a dehumanizing effect that those videos illustrate that kind of explains everything else about this war.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the dehumanization of Palestinians is so endemic in Israeli society for so many years, and has kind of been supported and not really called out by supposedly Israel's allies, who should be, you know, warning their partner, their ally, against these anti-democratic dehumanization that is endemic. This is what I felt in the immediate aftermath. I saw in another neighborhood that Ariel and I were stationed, I found a corpse of an elderly Palestinian woman in 2014, and it was horrific. And I asked myself, you know, who was she? How did she get there? Why wasn't she evacuated? And I learned about this entire family of 8 women, children, and elderly who were killed. And I asked myself, who are these people? How did they get there? And the circumstances in which, even though IDF soldiers were there and identified this family, they were bombed and killed, led me to realize that really the Israeli military did not do enough, and certainly in this war has not done enough to prevent the death of innocent soldiers. And not only that, also shortly after I got back from the fighting in 2014, I heard a story in which an Israeli human rights organization bought airtime on a public radio to read the names of Palestinian civilians who had been killed, I think Palestinian children. And it was censored. It was censored by the Israeli public radio. So this dehumanization is definitely endemic, and it's something that we really need to fight against.
So on that note, Ariel, we're talking about dehumanization and the kind of endemic nature of some of the racist views in Israeli society about Palestinians. Israeli society has clearly moved to the right, some might say far right, in recent years. How does someone like yourself, a veteran, now a peace activist, breaking the silence, how do you talk to your fellow Israelis about what's happening in Gaza as a political minority? I'm assuming that when you talk to Israelis about what's happening in Gaza, a lot of them say to you, well, it's the fault of Hamas. Hamas attacked us. Hamas have human shields. We know all the arguments. What do you say when you talk to normal, everyday Israelis about what's happening in Gaza?
It's difficult, and it's becoming more and more difficult the more we're deep in the mud of the war. It's becoming extremely difficult to hold the complexity, and people are pushed to choose a side, or they're hanging on to a narrative that it's either us or them, and there's no space for both people on this land. And the more violence escalates, the more blood is shed, it becomes more difficult for people to hold the complexity. And to speak about the humanity of Palestinians in these days, to speak about solidarity with Palestinians these days, not only is difficult, it's scary, it's dangerous. And not a lot of people have openness to hear about that at this moment, where a lot of people are grieving. If you walk in the streets of Tel Aviv, you'll see everywhere stickers and pictures of people who died in a party or soldiers who have fallen, and people are actually in authentic grief. And I think the government and our leaders also know how to use that grief in order to create more dehumanization.
Yes.
And one thing that I wanted to say is, one way that I speak about it with the people around me is that both me and Benzi, who served together, happen to suffer also of moral injury and PTSD, and it's something that deeply scarred us and we have to take with us in our lives. And I think that dehumanization, committing the kind of atrocities that we're committing these days, and the images that we're seeing coming out of Gaza are going to hurt us completely in a different way than they're going to hurt the primary victims in Gaza, but they're going to damage Israeli society, and who knows where this is going to lead. It's going to change us. So that's the way I try to talk about it with people.
Benzi, Ariel mentioned solidarity. I'm just wondering, when Israelis see what's happening on American university campuses, college campuses, now British and European campuses too, people protesting like we've never seen them protest before, not in modern times. How do most Israelis understand these protests? Do they see them simply as anti-Semitic hate protests? Or do these protests help inspire people like yourself and Ariel and others on the anti-occupation Israeli peace side?
It's a good question. I really don't feel. I actually was just in the U.S. I visited my family, and I saw actually in downtown Manhattan this protest at the New School, and it's hard for me to speak for Israeli society or to do like a real survey of public opinion. But one thing I'll say is, I think that this is, even if some of the rhetoric at these protests is things that I disagree with, sometimes strongly, sometimes I think is completely unacceptable, I think that the fact that people are delegitimizing Israel's existence is actually a result of kind of an equality that an equation that for so long Israel has promoted in and of itself. They're saying that the settlements are Israel. The violent domination of Palestinians are Israel, and therefore people are just taking them at their word and saying, okay, if that's Israel, if this is inherently part of what Israel is,
Good
then
point.
we're going to call for the destruction of Israel. As much as that doesn't sit well with me as an Israeli, I think the problem is that our society and our government needs to look itself in the mirror and say, can we exist without dominating through military force Palestinians? And we need to work towards that. And until we do, I think that we're going to have to, be reminded by the people who are really taking our government at their word. And again, I hope for a better future in which Israel can exist side by side in some kind of arrangement with the Palestinian people as equals with self-determination. Yes. But I think that that is not the vision of the current Israeli government. And I think that these protesters are simply taking our government at their own word.
Last question to you, Ariel. Joe Biden says he's pausing a shipment of bombs to Israel. He says he won't provide more arms to Israel if Benjamin Netanyahu launches what he calls a major invasion of Rafah. Is this another one of his unenforced or unenforceable red lines? Or could this actually be a game changer for US-Israel relations? Because we know the Israeli military really can't do what it's doing without American support.
Well, what I might say can make a lot of people in my country angry, but seeing the news this morning of what Biden said, also sanctions that have been set on the violent settlers in the last few weeks, have been a sign of huge hope for me. For the first time, maybe, I've been an activist for some years now, and it's not enough necessarily. I don't know if it's what's going to change or going to prevent an invasion into Rafah, but it does feel definitely historical. And if I may just about that say a little story. Right after the war in Gaza, around 2015, the primaries in the Democratic Party, or maybe it was already the presidential campaign of Hillary Clinton, I was trying to move on from what I've experienced as a soldier invading Gaza. And on her campaign, she spoke in front of AIPAC. And she said something, don't catch me on the word, but along the lines of no matter what, we will always support Israel. Yeah. Maybe something close to blindly. I don't even know if she said that exactly. But I remember feeling this huge rage inside of me because I suddenly realized that her word in front of AIPAC in that place saying that no matter what, we won't be held accountable. She doesn't need to send her children to commit the crimes that she's going to send us to do or that we're going to be sent to do. So her words in AIPAC and that kind of not holding us accountable, in the end of the day, it hurt me on a personal level. And I'm happy. I don't know if it's enough or there's more needed. I hope it would be enough, but let's see where it's going. It's a beginning of a trend. But the point is that I think my government, my state needs to be held accountable. And it's for my hope for my own future and my family and my friends.
We're out of time, but I appreciate you both, Ariel and Benzi. We don't agree on everything, but I appreciate you both trying to hold your government and state accountable. Appreciate you taking time out for Mehdi Unfiltered today. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Mehdi.